Today we're talking with Sean Nowlin. We're going to be going over some things about ABM and the state of ABM in the new year and what we expect to be coming and some of the trends that we're seeing. Sean's the founder of SpotlightIQ, an ABM tool focused on B2B audiences within OTT, CTV, and programmatic. And I'm really excited to get into it. I'm really interested to hear just at the top, like, what are your predictions for ABM in general, and then CTV, OTT, and programmatic in 2026?
I think in general, a lot of conversations I've had with B2B marketers, the ones that have used the big ABM platforms or not, I think there's been some discussion about trying to get away from the big platforms and kind of stitch together some things in a composable stack kind of way. So I think this year is the year of the composable ABM stack where you're going to have a lot of really smart marketers trying to piece some things together rather than, dive into a really expensive licensing platform situation where they may or may not need it. And I think a lot of, taking a step back in the programmatic space, I think a lot of people have gotten caught in that trap there too over the years where they get into something that they maybe not need just because they don't know enough about it. So I think that in general is, where I think some ABM things are going this year.
I think that's interesting. I think one of the most common refrains that I heard over and over again through the course of 2025 and 24 and 23 as well is everybody's trying to get more efficient, do more with less. Money is less accessible than it used to be. I think there's a little bit of the clog in the drain seems to be loosening a bit this year or towards the end of last year, but still there was a renewed focus on efficiency, doing what you're suggesting, also moving away from big platform fees, whether it be in programmatic or in ABM tools, is really in line with what we've been hearing across the board from our clients as well. So, if the goal here is to be able to be as efficient as possible, do more with less, avoiding a 5-figure a month platform fee is an easy way to do it. And I think that the truth is a lot of those tools were really revolutionary for their time. And especially in the programmatic space, there was no alternative for a long time to some of those bigger players. And when 6 Sense came along, they were the first big platform really doing what they were doing. And that process seems to have moved a lot faster than the programmatic space. But in each instance, there's a lot of opportunities now for people to do what the trade desk does with a lot lower cost and to do what 6 Sense does with a lot lower cost. And I think we're going to see a lot more people doing that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
It's interesting too. If you look at demand base, when you and I worked together a long time ago, demand base was the DSP for ABM, and that was really what they were known as. And fast forward to today, they're 6 Sense competitor, right? So it's they have grown into something huge. After really taking the term account-based marketing and running with it, now they're one of those platforms. But again, they have this piece. The advertising piece that's still there that is, maybe somebody needs that but doesn't need everything else, the bells and whistles. Obviously I come from the media side of things, right? So my exposure to ABM and B2B marketing in general is mostly from the media side. But it's interesting to me to have watched that. And then every other player in the space that exists in the programmatic or the demand side platforms, the DSPs like Trade Desk, they're still all consumer focused. Even the connected TV specific platforms that have grown up in the past few years, like Mountain or Vibe, they are really just focused on consumer audiences and how to get in front of consumers. They don't speak ABM, let alone having anything more sophisticated in B2B other than some data segments that they have from a specific provider. So it's a lot of things that are meant for consumers, meant for B2C, being used for ABM. And then the ABM players in the space that have grown, they've just grown way beyond caring about percentage of media fees kind of thing.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things that are really interesting to me in the marketing space in general, as I see a lot of, not just on the programmatic space or just in general, I see a lot of innovation on the B2C side and not as much on the B2B side. Does that mirror what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, that's kind of what we've been focusing on, is trying to be a little bit more innovative in that space. I think, mainly it is an ABM platform, just a classic kind of SaaS play. There's a certain model that works for that. And, they're going after certain types of bigger enterprise. Everybody also wants to always go after enterprise, right? So then if you look at the consumer space, there's just not as many, there's advertisers that need to target. But in the B2C space, there's just a lot more to target. There's a lot more people. There's a lot more shampoo buyers than there are for a fintech product. So like where does it make most sense to invest? You're going to want to invest in where the dollars are going to be spent more. And that tends to be in B2C. But I think that's just because the platforms that are out there and the investments that are made are just made in the classic sense, trying to get a big ROI and a big multiple. And B2B doesn't really trigger that for some people. I think you really just have to, figure out who's putting the investment in there, and it's not going to be the big players because it's just always been that way. But I think there is room for others to grow in this market, not expecting the multiple that you would get if you were Trade Desk or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think one of the other things that I think is advantageous for companies when they're building their tool to focus on consumer side rather than B2B side is just data richness. Because if you're selling shampoo in your example, you can go off of revenue earned because the revenue is realized relatively quickly, whereas in B2B, you're looking at a binary. Did they convert? Did they not convert? And it's very difficult from a statistical standpoint to be able to build models that help you find your best customer as easily as possible because a lot of the revenue events are happening way later. So you just have fewer data points to touch on as well. So I think it's like the B2B problem seems to me just much harder to solve in general than the consumer side problems. But what are some of the limitations that you're seeing in your space on the B2B and ABM side compared to like how the problems that you help solve maybe would have helped solved in the past on the consumer side?
Well, I think you hit it already talking about just you're seeing returns faster. And every single one of those platforms that exists, everything, all the signals, all of the optimizations, the success, the CPA goal that you're trying to hit, is all within the platform itself, right? So like there's still a struggle in the B2C to say, okay, I have a $50 CPA, in Trade Desk. What does that mean alongside everything else that you're doing? So like, you're having to like stitch together the data and figure out, is this just deduplication? What about incrementality? So I think even the B2C side can still have a lot of problems, but that's still all B2C stuff. And I think that in a B2B world, you have to be able to understand, more about the targeting, more about who you're trying to reach. If you are just putting out a TV ad, for example, in Cleveland, you're going to hit a lot of people, but you're going to hit a lot of wrong people. I mean, that technology that exists to target consumers exists for the B2B side. So if you have, a buyer at a company, you can actually target that person, that the buyer at that company while they're at home watching TV. And I don't think that tying the business side and the personal side really just exists natively in any of those platforms. So I think being able to truly target your accounts in connected TV and programmatic in general is just something that most don't focus on, just because, like I said, it's all B2C, it's all consumer identity graph.
Well, I mean, I think also just like in the history of advertising, like video is a really compelling form, but the issue has been outside of like mass market, it's been very difficult to manage because it's hard to make sure that you're hitting the right people. How are you handling the sort of like persona targeting and targeting issues today?
So it just goes back to kind of the data that you're using. So we use data that's 100% deterministic based off of things like job title. So you're, kind of like your LinkedIn style firmographic type targeting based off of the company, industry, but also buyer persona, VP of marketing. So going at that route instead of that, like I said earlier, that B2C targeting of people that show up in this data segment because they have an affinity for Crest or something like that. They're in 5,000 different buckets because they have some data signal that says they've done this or liked this or searched for this in the past. But if we're talking about starting with the people themselves and then fitting those into a segment. So the difficulties there are just how many people you have in the segment or whatever you're trying to target, either stakeholders at a company or the buyers, the stakeholders at the company. Just depends on how large it is. If you're a smaller advertiser, you only have like a few hundred accounts or something like that. That's a lot. It still is harder to manage. But if you have a decent sized list of companies you're trying to reach and stakeholders, their business persona can be tied to the personal persona, and that just does not exist in most places in the B2C side of things.
What are the foundational things that you think a company needs to get in place for ABM tooling to start getting some of these pieces in place so they can start doing some of what you're talking about?
So, I mean, you can also, tell me too, like, the clients that you've talked to, but I think that from my conversations, some of them, depending on the industry they're in, they don't even have their like CRM figured out, let alone having a robust ABM strategy. And even if they do have a CRM, let's say they have a HubSpot, it's unstructured. It's just every
Yeah.
account's in there, right? And so, I mean, it's spending some time or working with a tool that can help create lists or segmentation, so you're not just blankly targeting everybody with the same messaging. But I think it just still starts kind of with some blocking and tackling. Is first of all, who are you trying to target? Do you understand your persona? Do you understand your customer? And then do you have a database of contacts that you're trying to reach? And are they segmented by message, either by industry or something like that? So I think that's just really still blocking and tackling. But in my experience in the past year, talking about this specifically is like there are a lot of advertisers out there, even mid-market sized businesses that are right now today in January of 2026 right now figuring out they got to redo their CRM system. They've been using some antiquated thing for 10, 15 years, or they installed, HubSpot Pixel 3 years ago, or still have to figure out how to work. But now I think because what you said earlier about things have been kind of economy wise moving a little bit faster, I think they're fine. Some people are starting to move faster and figuring out those things. They have more time to figure it out, or they have the people to figure it out. But yeah, blocking and tackling and just having an understanding of who your customer is first, and then what do you have a database of existing customers and the prospects that you're trying to go after.
Yeah. It's actually interesting. I've been on two calls that basically reflect almost exactly what you said, like just today, like this morning. One of them was discovery call where their big initiative going into the beginning of the year is retooling their CRM to make sure that they can tie marketing metrics to business outcomes rather than just reporting to leads and MQLs, which is, I think, one of the most foundational steps you can make to be successful at any of your B2B marketing is like, unless you're driving to meaningful business outcomes, what are we doing? And then the other one was talking about, doing customer interviews for their product and how they really defined who they were and who their customer was, and how that was fundamental to their success story and how they transitioned into like being a fledgling early stage startup to what they are today. It's just funny, like the two things other people have mentioned to me this morning.
Yeah, that's funny, right?
So,
But it's true though. It's weird. I mean, and I think you're like kind of like B2B SaaS, fintech. You're more, startup. I've talked to companies that have been around for 20 years in like the manufacturing
yeah,
space or construction space, and they are having the same thoughts today that a B2B, SaaS or fintech company is, which is really funny to me. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're a brand new startup or a Series A or a 20-year-old generational business. Like
yeah.
they're all starting to figure this out.
Well, I think one of the things that I've noticed also from running a business that is sort of like often forgotten a lot, and I think a lot of companies' growth story is like what got you to this point is not necessarily what's going to get you to the next point. And I think a lot of companies like where they fail is they think like, well, we've always done it this way and this has worked. So like, why would we change it? But it's like,
Right.
if you want to take that next big step, like things have to be different. You know what I mean? What I think a lot of companies are realizing. And then I think there's also just been this big push for efficiency and like what may have worked in the past, what used to be good in the past is maybe not good in today's economy, So a lot of companies are learning how to shift and adjust off of that. But I also want to ask you, like you mentioned something that my agency generally works with like earlier stage, sort of like Series A and later startups that are relatively new companies. And you've worked with a lot of like mid-market and enterprise and like sort of legacy businesses that have been around for 20 years. And I'm kind of curious to hear your perspective, like how do ABM needs shift as you go from working with those smaller, earlier stage companies to like more mid-market, enterprise, and like legacy businesses?
So to be clear, manufacturing, construction are part of the companies I talk to. I also speak to smaller companies, that are in the B2B SaaS or fintech space. That being said, I think their problems with like ABM and what to do, how to handle account based marketing also just depends on their team and the capabilities of their team. Who is first choosing the tools that you're using? Who are using these tools? What are you enabling them with? How are you empowering your sales team with that data? Are you just saying, hey, here's your assigned list of accounts, go at it. We will do marketing automation and, hey, this person visited the website. We're going to send an email out kind of a thing. but what if you're able to, enable them with other pieces of data, like, they came to the website and did these actions, or they saw this ad on TV and then came to the site, or whatever. It just matters on how you're enabling your team and who your team is, what your team composed of. I don't think that really makes a difference between kind of legacy business or startup. I think it's truly about the vision and the plan, and it doesn't matter if we're talking B2B or B2C media choices and ad tech and all that. I think it still just goes back to a lot of foundational things. And if you're not set up to be able to have a good team and make the decisions, it doesn't matter what tool you use, or it doesn't matter what marketing channel you're using. I think that is the common thing. So to hear either it's a startup or it's a 20-year-old business or older saying the same thing, I just think it goes back to vision and team and what you're trying to accomplish. And do you have somebody there to help guide, because I think it's all great to say we want to be more efficient or we want to grow, but what does it actually mean? If you have a leadership that's saying we want to be more efficient, like I said, what does that actually mean? How are we trying to be more efficient? What are our goals for the year? And I don't think it makes a difference if it's a Series A startup or if it's a 20-year-old, 50-year-old business or anything like that. It just depends on the leadership.
I think that's what we're seeing too, is like the tactics and strategies don't really shift too much between like the different sizes of business. It's just about determining who your customer is, and the strategies do shift a little bit in the sense of like who you're going after, but like the actual mechanisms by which you accomplish the end goal is relatively similar. It's just a matter of what level of sophistication you're using and what types of buyers, and like the upfront work before you do the marketing work that really determines the difference between startup and enterprise. And those various things, right? Like when we work with enterprise companies, our sales enablement material is through the roof. When we're working with startups, we have like 2 guides we're trying to share out or whatever, and like that's like one of the big key differences, is just like the level of resourcing that you have at your disposal. I mean, along with like budget, I guess, and everything else. But and I think this is actually an interesting thing also that I wanted to kind of ask you is, we're talking a lot about ABM, and ABM has been around for a long time. And I think the reason that B2B companies don't get behind it as much as they did is because tooling was really expensive. Things were really hard to implement. Someone has to own it and really understand it and be able to effectively explain business value from it. But do you have any idea about what are some of the other issues that B2B companies are coming across that makes them sort of shy away from a broader ABM strategy?
I think that, the issue is they think about it from a big picture standpoint, and they might start doing some searches about account-based marketing, and they're going to get 6 Sense, and they're going to get demand science, and they're going to get all the links to all these companies, and they're just going to see all this stuff. Like, do I really need all these things? And then they don't have a partner that's going to tell them yes or no, you need these things. And I think just jumping in to that term and searching for that term and trying to learn more about it is just by very nature, I think, overwhelming. I think that that's it. But if you really kind of break down what ABM is, because actually I did look into this recently, because I did have a conversation with like the original chief marketing officer, Greg Ott, from Demand Base recently. And they were like tooling around a couple different terms to use to kind of ride off of. And they just chose account-based marketing, which had actually been around for, I think, a decade or two before. And then just like this is what it is. But like they coined that when that was basically like the programmatic DSP. And then all these other platforms kind of grown and then grew into that, whether or not they're already doing ABM and they just didn't like call it that. But that's what it is now. It's just this massive, platform that you use, and there's tons of different modules. I mean, think about if you're from where we came from originally, working with startup companies that are trying to do paid search, or they might just do it for Facebook, trying to do programmatic, and does display even work? Mm-hmm. That was overwhelming for those companies too, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So I can't even imagine, somebody that isn't experienced or been around a long time looking at what this all is. And I think that's just daunting to some people. But if you can teach them that you can get the same types of things without having to use these massive platforms, then they will be interested in that. But what are you really trying to do? You're just trying to break it into composable pieces. That what tools can you use to reach your target accounts? That's it. Like it's not rocket science. How do you reach but it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, one of the big things I would always tell our clients when 6 Sense was picking up a huge amount of market share in the space, I kept saying, like, Have you tried just running like account-based campaigns on LinkedIn to see if this is a strategy you want to pursue before you pay for the big platform fees? And like in all honesty, I think to your point, account-based marketing has now also become sort of synonymous with demand-based and Sixth Sense, but like in reality, as a practice, it can be done with a lot of smaller, more individualized pieces that are much lower cost and much more approachable rather than being this big daunting experience. So I think that's something that we've seen a lot too. Is I've always tried to be like, hey, before you like
Right.
jump in this pool, maybe we should dip our toes in the water over here and make sure we want to do this. You know what I mean? And I think that's like the thing that I think a lot of people got away from. And again, this is sort of like talking about the difference of like the business culture today versus the business culture a couple of years ago, where when money was a lot more accessible,
Yep.
firm fees weren't as daunting,
Yeah.
and now they're a little bit more
Sure. Sign me up.
concerning.
Yes.
Yeah,
No problem. We'll worry about the bills later.
it's like my investor said this was really good.
Capital's
Yeah,
cheap.
yeah, exactly. So I had two other questions that I wanted to really ask about like ABM and get some thoughts on your approach here too. One is sort of like, what are some of the things that are working today that weren't working 5 or 6 years ago, and vice versa? Like what did work 5 or 6 years ago that doesn't work now? How has like the ABM process shifted over time?
I think if you talk about, from my perspective, my experience, programmatic, IP address targeting was kind of the foundational thing of all of that. Businesses, can you target somebody on a business IP address, while they're on their business computer? And that was pre-COVID, and then remote work happened. Everybody is split up at home. That IP address targeting did not, work as well. Oh, hey, and then we're gonna, Apple's gonna get rid of the, tracking, and we're missing, you're missing a ton of signals there. So good luck with all of that. So I think that caused a lot of confusion and disappointment. And I think though now, of course, now that cookies are staying, and Google's cool with that. And oh, hey, by the way, IP address is no longer a serious privacy concern. So we're going to back the idea that IP address is okay again. I think some of the things that people maybe got away from with IP address targeting specifically will kind of become more prevalent, I think for sure. And a lot of things that may have worked, that people got away from because of the split between home and work. I think that some of those things are going to come back again because
Yeah.
in today's world, your home life and your work life, those can be tied together. I mean, we still live in a world where, unfortunately, advertising pays for everything that we're doing, using the internet. That's just the media, the revenue generation vehicle for everybody, right? So like, I think that, that just coming back around again, being able to tie those things together, and IP address becoming okay. I think
Yeah.
that's going to cause a lot of things to turn around and be tried again that maybe people ditched out on. So, it could be any number of platforms that were really big in IP address targeting that may have people gotten away from. But then again, demand based was one of them, and they became a big platform. So maybe people are going to try to like knock on that door again, figure out that maybe they don't need to go to demand based to find IP address targeting.
No, that's awesome. So that's like really cues up the next question really nicely is what is your big prediction for 2026 here at the beginning of January? What do you think is the big prediction you want to make?
So are we talking prediction from the B2B specific ABM angle, or programmatic, connected TV angle, or all the above?
I think just sort of media prediction in 2026, and then my follow-up question was already going to be the ABM strategy piece. But yeah, what's your like media prediction for 2026?
Yeah,
And
so I think that you're going to see in the connected TV space, you're going to see Netflix get really, really big when it comes to, or attempt to become really, really big. My understanding, things I've read, talked to, people I've talked to, they're really making an investment in their whole kind of walled garden stack that they hadn't done before. Because when they launched a couple of years ago, it really wasn't ready for prime time, and I think the person that ended up running the sales there left after a year. But they were just kind of, I think it was a little bit more of like an old school media approach, kind of upfront buying, and not understanding that there are pipes that need to be put together to enable buying and selling. So I think you're going to see Netflix really pop up as kind of a CTV platform like you see with Hulu or Roku or Peacock. That's, I think so. I think Netflix will probably start standing out as another standalone walled garden in the space. Amazon's going to continue to get bigger from their DSP perspective with their inventory with Fire TV. And I think you'll probably see those growths happening at the expense of like a Trade Desk this year. And so I think you're going to see budgets shifting from Trade Desk over to testing new CTV specific stuff like Netflix or to Amazon DSP. I think that those are my kind of my big media predictions for the year.
I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with like the Warner Brothers deal, which seems like is going to change the landscape pretty dramatically for CTT and OTT, and ultimately have a big impact on the ABM side. Like the last question I wanted to ask is like, what is your biggest hot take on ABM strategy heading into 2026 then?
My biggest hot take is go the composable route, piece together your stack, have good teams, work with good teams, helping you figure that out, and be okay with having an outsider tell you that this doesn't work or this does work. But I just feel that, this is the year with all the tools, especially including connected TV, piecing things together that help you target your exact accounts or find more of those accounts is easier to do when you're piecing things together. So I don't think the big platforms need necessarily to you don't need to go that route anymore. I don't know if it's a hot take, but that's just my take on ABM in general this year is the composable stack is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a big advocate of that forever, is like, rather than paying for expensive tools, find ways to do what you need to do at as low cost as you can. It's sort of like the MVP model of launching products, but like you want to find your minimal viable opportunity to accomplish the end goal that you're looking to accomplish. And then if it works, build up to bigger stuff, but not necessarily focusing on the big price tag stuff first.
Well, let me push back to you too. Like when you're saying like test things out, I know you said you work, startups or Series A and above, so they are probably trying to figure out their whole mix here. What feedback have you gotten when you talk about the idea of the composable stack versus going directly to a 6 cents or something like that?
I think the thing for us is we're pretty platform agnostic, and generally speaking, like we work with whatever clients have at their disposal. So we're only a party to these discussions when they're going through this process while working with us. And generally speaking, that's where we have an opportunity as thought leaders in the space and this people driving strategy for our clients. We can say, I suggest you do this first, and then we can get voted down pretty easily by our clients. But like we, as like the experts in the space, usually will advise. We'll usually advise to work on, find whatever the lowest cost way to get to our end goal is as an initial test. And then when we run out of scale, then moving up. So like, just generally speaking, the way that we think about marketing in general also is we usually advise people away from spending too much time on display and programmatic until they've filled out the more low funnel opportunities in their stack. And that's where usually we focus more of our energy is, helping people fill out the bottom of the funnel with like Google search, so you can start answering hand raisers and getting them in the system and getting them in your program. Then moving a little bit wider into intent-based channels like LinkedIn and Meta. And then as we move a little bit wider, we start moving into account-based approaches within those networks, and then account-based approaches more broadly through programmatic and things like that. So we think about things as sort of a stacked funnel like that.
And I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, when I was at my last agency I was at, like I had many conversations where we're in the sales process, and I would say like I do not think programmatic is right for this prospect, and I think that anybody trying to sell them on it is doing them a disservice. And sometimes that was my detriment, but that comes from where I grew up initially at Progressive, where we had the data and we spoke real truth. And I just always have that's how I've always been for almost 20 years. And I think that is you have to speak the truth in order to do that. My question to you though is, okay, so I get having you have demand there, and how do we capture that demand as efficient as possible? But how do you approach a Series A startup and who still needs to work on awareness? Because programmatic in general, right, was kind of always known as the brand awareness part of this whole thing, even if you had retargeting as part of it. So how do you approach awareness and trying to and then getting into consideration for these companies that are in growth mode? I'm just curious on like where do you come down on and again, not about programmatic specifically, but about generating awareness for a product or a service for a startup?
Yeah, I think the hardest challenge that we have from a marketing perspective is working with category creators because there isn't demand to go capture, and you have to go create that demand within your user base, right? Or your customer base. Again, there, I think the best opportunity is to try and find the lowest cost opportunity to get in front of those eyeballs. And usually that's not like, paying for a big ABM tool. It's about targeting people in LinkedIn on an account-based approach or a contact-focused approach. I guess it's company or contact approach. Both are account-based marketing, but using that as our first lever because that's probably the best way to go about it. Using some data enrichment tools like Clay, or, we have clients that use ZoomInfo or Apollo, but again, we're very platform agnostic, so we adhere to whatever our clients have at their disposal and create some sort of proxy for what rough look LinkedIn targeting would look like on Meta or other channels, and then targeting people that way. Generally, we haven't seen as much success doing that as I would have expected because just the stitching professional back to personal using the tools that we have at our disposal a lot of times is not as clean as one would hope. If you don't have a sophisticated go-to-market engineer, it's a little bit tough sometimes. So just trying to lean on ZoomInfo is not usually going to get you where you need to get. But that's sort of the way that we approach it, is trying to figure out what the minimal approach to be able to get to that end is and then accomplish that and get in front of those people as frequently as possible, because to build awareness, to build yourself as a category, the main goals are going to be the two primary measures that you think about in traditional advertising are reach and frequency. And it's really about having the right audience that you want, reaching the broadest number within that small group, and then hitting them as many times as possible is the only way that you can do it effectively from a cost perspective. Because, in traditional TV advertising, you think about reach and frequency, but you're usually selling ubiquitous goods that anyone can buy. But when you're in a B2B market, you want to fish from a smaller pool rather than being in the middle of that big ocean, right? So finding a way to niche down so that you can get in front of just the right people is the big thing that we always think about. So yeah, that's kind of
No, I agree. I agree. Honestly, what I've been working on at SpotlightIQ, it specifically addresses that concern, right? You have to be able to target the right people, whether or not it's specific buyers at a company or at multiple companies. But you still have to be able to tie it back, and you still have to be able to, see, is it you're doing any kind of action? Are we able to marry it into our CRM? I guess that was what I wanted to ask you about, was with these startups that you talk to, are they using HubSpot, or are they using a CRM? What is helping them understand the customers are going after and the actions that they're taking?
The stacks that our customers are most frequently using is usually HubSpot. I would say earlier on in my business's existence, we had a lot more Salesforce clients using Salesforce. And I think Salesforce has sort of priced themselves out of our client base in a lot of ways. And HubSpot has really added a lot of features while remaining still a relatively affordable tool in the space. So most of our clients are using HubSpot as their main tool. And then usually there's some sort of sales or audience tool in addition to it. And that's sort of the stack that we're usually working with. And then the rest of it is just, we try to use native platform stuff rather than adding any additional software. My general focus as a business operator and a marketer is to be as software light as possible, because to your point about Composable ABM stack, there's no need to add any layers on top of the ad networks themselves. It's about just being really good in that. And ad networks themselves, I think, is more valuable than trying to rely on tools to accomplish that.
Yep. No, I agree. I think too, is it's interesting, as you mentioned, the kind of awareness side of things and picking the pieces to start with, and then not really seeing a lot of results. And is that more of can't really see anything happening in we don't know if these accounts are moving down the funnel because they did an XYZ. Is that because they're just not connecting the different platforms, or just not, or they're using stuff outside of the platforms that connect to HubSpot, for example?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that we've seen, we were talking about this goaling around efficiency and the change in the market over the last couple of years. The biggest thing that we've seen is just a big movement towards pipeline marketing, attributed pipeline growth rather than driving leads. We're focusing on opportunities and pipeline specifically. And that's where HubSpot's been super important. And then within that, like I would say a bunch of our clients, being that they are a little bit earlier startups, there's not as defined an account base as there might be for larger companies where they're like, we're selling insurance to this vertical. So it ends up being a little bit trickier to apply a lot of account-based approaches at a really broad scope, which is why, I think LinkedIn's account-based tool is really solid. Like it really accomplishes a lot of what you need to do in a startup space without having to add a lot of extra tooling. So yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I think for me, my experience with LinkedIn, it when you're staying within the platform, I think it's definitely done what it's supposed to do, and it's an easy way to get into it, right? But selfishly,
from a lot of people have like there's like a default setting now that has you run across their audience network, which I've seen a number of clients in pitches have selected, and I'm like, oof.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, like so. Within the past like year and a half or whatever it was, LinkedIn started doing connected TV. It was in beta, and then took it out of beta, and it's still in beta as far as I'm concerned. And when I hear everybody talking about quoting not ready for prime time when you're even talking about TV, which I think is funny, but just simply, the typical kind of problems about not being able to get good impressions, good quality, networks to show up, or we don't know what we're getting, or we have to use the reps to get something that should be that any media buyer could do in another world, So I think that to me, that's like a kind of a pet peeve of mine is adding in connected TV. But the tool in and of itself as ABM, LinkedIn is an easy button for some. And I think when you try to overcomplicate it, it's like, come on.
When I'm talking about ABM, like the only instance where I've seen it really be successful is that specifically focusing on platform LinkedIn users. Because I think the other thing too there is like the benefit of that LinkedIn has on their account-based approach with like LinkedIn users is just if you're on LinkedIn, you're there for a business purpose.
Yep.
Hopefully. Otherwise, like, yeah. No, but like if you're on LinkedIn, you're there to either hire or look for a job or to learn something about your business. So you're like in the right mindset. And I think that's the instance where like doing account-based approaches where we're taking professional user IDs and applying that, and getting their personal IDs and then targeting them on Meta has been less successful is because they're just there for a different purpose.
Context matters, man. I mean, totally. Yeah. Like, again, the idea of showing an ad in a feed on LinkedIn for business purposes is tremendously different than showing up in Facebook feed for the same purpose, right? Totally different context. But like one of the reasons why connected TV has gotten so big in general is that it's 100% viewable, almost 99 whatever, 100% completion rate pretty much because you can't really skip unless depending on what platform you're watching on. But you have people engaged in a moment and they're watching TV. So and people that are watching TV are more engaged even if they're on their phones at the same time than if you're just sitting back and watching linear television. So like the context matters. So if you're grabbing somebody's attention while they're relaxed and lean back in their living room, that's a way better thing to do than Facebook advertising with that business things. I think CTV on LinkedIn made sense, but again, what we said was getting off of their platform with the way they're set up. That's where the rails start to fall.
They haven't been successful at doing that in any area.
No. But then again, a lot of other places try to do off network like Facebook or whatever, and a lot of those things never really worked as well as the on platform stuff, really.
Yeah, 100%. Even like when you look at like Google Search Partners versus Google Search, like it is a huge downgrade, even though it's roughly the same tool operating on different sites. Yeah, this was amazing. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll have to do it again soon.
Definitely.